So, as you can see, I'm going to be talking about purpose-driven learning, and I think I'm going to walk around if it's okay. I'd rather do that. Maybe I'll head over here. So, I'm in a School of Public Health and School of Medicine at the University of Michigan, and in public health, we are interested in preventing things, and we may be working hard to prevent polio in children. As they get older, we obviously work in, immunizing people against COVID, and we could help people quit smoking or manage their weight or do many, many, many other things. Obviously, public health is very special in that way, and it's very close to my heart. And what we typically do is focus on these 4 criteria. One is making sure we have high reach. So we're reaching large populations. We're not just working with individuals who are waiting to get through the clinic doors. We are going out toward large populations who are in need. The second criteria is efficacy. We want to make sure that our interventions, while very broad and population-based, also need to be effective. And third, since public health almost never has any money, we need to do it at a low cost as well. So we need to do this in large-scale populations, often working with governments and other groups, large organizations, and dealing with populations, you do this typically at a relatively low cost. And finally, making sure that everybody has the opportunity to be exposed to these interventions. All 4 of those things are relevant in any kind of public health intervention we engage in. Now, we have a new epidemic, and the epidemic is one related to mental health issues. So that's what I'll be talking about today. So many people are running around, wandering around directionless now, and it's increased over time. People feel they don't have the direction that maybe my students did 10, 20, 30 years ago. I see more and more of my students having a hard time finding a purpose, finding a direction. So that's something we'll be talking about. When we look at Asia, we look at Malaysia, Singapore, Indonesia, Thailand, etc. What we see is this is a very generational issue. We see that Gen X, in terms of those with high mental health risk, these aren't necessarily people with mental health problems. They're at high risk for mental health problems. 24% of individuals 44 to 59, in other words, are Gen X, Generation X, have these issues. Millennials, 28 to 43, 44%. But then let's look at Generation Z, 18 to 27-year-olds, 61% are at high risk. And this is no surprise to anybody who teaches people who are Gen Zs now. This is a very, very big issue for all of us as teachers. If we look at this by country, those who are at high mental health risk by country, we see right away at the bottom here is Thailand, who is far exceeding these other countries in terms of preventing or having low levels of mental health risk relative to these other countries. So this is really important, I think, and something that we should take note of. But also what we should take note of is that people in technology fields tend to have higher mental health risk. And we would think, wow, you're in technology, you're in the cutting edge of cool stuff, you're probably making more money than other people, and you would think that you would have a lot of purpose and meaning, and yet these people have the highest level of mental health risk. And you can follow, you see healthcare is not far behind that as well. So anxiety is an issue, stress is an issue, depression is an issue. And we'll be talking about those things today. When we look at work engagement, how engaged, and we use what's called the Utrecht engagement scale, a modification of that. But in this, we ask people how engaged and connected are they with their work. And we see that that's really strongly associated with anxiety. So if I have more anxiety, I also tend to have less engagement in my job. Also notice that it doesn't take a lot to have this influence. In other words, the people who are mild all the way through moderately severe are pretty similar in their association with engagement. when we look at this by retention intent, do you plan on staying in your job over the next 2 years? You see that people who have more anxiety are far more likely to be looking around for other jobs. So anxiety, depression, these are really important factors. I could go on and give an entire talk about these things, but it's important, I think, just to recognize that these are important. Anxiety and burnout, as you might expect, are really important as well. So what do we do about it? One of the things that we have done in our research is study the brain and find out what's going on in the brain when it comes to anxiety, when it comes to purpose, when it comes to core values, things like that. How is the brain working when we're considering that? So let's go ahead and study that. We put people in MRI, functional magnetic resonance imaging, we call it, or fMRI. We clamp their heads down. We slide them into this magnet called the MRI machine, which is an amazing machine. And we stimulate them with different ideas or thoughts. And one of the things we can do is scare a person. So while they're in there, we can show them images of really scary things like a rabid dog lunging at your face, and we can take a look at what happens in the brain. And one thing that happens right away is a very ancient part of the brain starts getting more oxygenated blood flow, and that's called the amygdala. The amygdala is often called the reptile brain. It's very ancient. And it can disrupt our entire brain. It can kind of hijack our brain. In fact, during COVID, there's a group of Italian researchers who talked about COVID hijacking our brain, allowing the amygdala to do that. It is ancient. Dinosaurs probably had amygdala 150 million years ago, so it's very, very old. And when that goes off, and we try to ask people, wow, you should work out more, or you should drink less alcohol, or you should sleep better, or you should maybe meditate to manage your stress. What happens when they're scared, when we threaten them, or when they're just simply very anxious? It's almost like a force field goes up. People tend to be more defensive in that case. And so this is something we need to do, we need to address. What do we do about this little almond-shaped part of our brain that's very ancient? Actually, there are two little almond-shaped parts of the brain called the amygdala. And by the way, we all need an amygdala. It's important if I'm hiking and suddenly I see a rattlesnake or some poisonous snake, I should jump back even before I go, oh, that's, I identify it as a poisonous snake. I should jump back. Our amygdala is important for us, and yet we don't want it to hijack our brains. So there is a part of the brain that also interacts and actually governs and can govern down our amygdala, and this is called the prefrontal cortex. And more specifically, there's a part right up here in the front called the ventral medial prefrontal cortex. And when that gets more active, it's able to govern down this fear center. And this part of the brain, this prefrontal cortex, we have as humans much more than any other animal. In fact, we have 3 times more prefrontal cortex than chimpanzees and any other animal that is close to us in this evolutionary cycle. So we have a lot of it. It's also quite modern compared to other parts of the brain, and yet the amygdala is very ancient, very old. I work with this woman, Emily Falk, who used to work in my laboratory, and now she has her own giant lab at the University of Pennsylvania. She's a very, very successful researcher, and she just came out with a new and wonderful book I'd highly recommend. If you're interested in the neuroscience of change, it's called What We Value, and she and I have done quite a bit of research in this area. Now, when you see my name at the end, it's because this was done in my laboratory. You scientists know that. And then Emily did all the hard work, along with the people in the middle. I didn't do the hard work. This is in my laboratory, and I'm also not a neuroscientist, so I just want to preface this with that. But what we do is take a look at what's going on in the brain when we start asking people to think about their core values. What matters most in their life? Do you value creativity? Do you value being rich? Do you value behaving in your society? Do you value success? Do you value being religious? Do you value kindness or having a good time? Do you value inner peace? We ask these questions and we take a look at the things that are most valuable in people. And when we do, this part of the brain gets more blood flow, this ventral medial prefrontal cortex. It's a very modern part of our brain. I like to call it the guru brain. And this part of the brain also is associated with two really important things right now, especially to educators and certainly to anybody interested in mental health. The first is future orientation. So when this part of the brain is stimulated, it's associated with future thinking. I'm starting to think, what are my different possible selves, for example? So I could, I might think about myself, if I do X, then Y might happen. If I do Z, then A might happen. Whatever those things are, I start thinking about what the consequences are. For example, if I say, I'm going to smoke, I'm a smoker. I'm not really, but if I'm a smoker, what might happen to me? So that's really important in public health, you might guess. We want people to have a future orientation. We want any student to have that future orientation. It's really important. So this part of the brain is associated with that. Also, really importantly, this part of the brain, the ventral medial prefrontal cortex, is associated with emotional self-regulation, meaning the ability to change our own emotional weather. We can move from cloudy and stormy to sunny suddenly. Can we do that? That turns out to be a real skill, isn't it? And it's a challenge for many people, even at the most senior levels of academia and science and medicine and other places. I work with Nobel laureates, and sometimes you go, wow, I wish you could regulate your emotions a little bit better. You would be a happier person and you'd be more effective in what you do. So this is something that we can teach people to do and be better, but this part of the brain is associated with that ability to manage your emotions. Turns out, interestingly enough, when we think about the Buddha and we think about this third eye right here, when we do our research, and this is, of course, called the Atman, when we look at this part of the brain, it appears to be almost in exactly the same place as the ventral medial prefrontal cortex. I was in northern Rishikesh, just north of Rishikesh, meeting with a guru to learn different forms of meditation a few years ago, and I was telling him about this research, and he said, oh, we've known that for 2,000 years. I said, oh, really? He said, when you meditate in a cave for 3 months or 6 months, you become your own MRI machine. I did not know that, but I actually believe it. So this all relates to purpose. Purpose is a values-driven, meaning it comes from our core values, what matters most to us, what we care about the most, self-organizing framework for channeling our energy and resources toward meaningful goals. So let's just think about that. We've talked about values and the importance of having values and what's going on in the brain during that time. But how about self-organizing? What does that mean? Well, let's just think about that in terms of the slides that I've shown so far. Many of those slides were created using artificial intelligence. So I've used a number of AI tools to create those. And in those tools, they ask for a prompt. So I decided to use a 16th century silkscreen painting from a Japanese silkscreen artist. And it's actually, this particular painting is hermetically sealed in a museum in Tokyo. I decided just to take a portion of it, image of it, and then use that as the prompt. I didn't want to use any of his painting. I just wanted to use the texture and the colors from it. But if we pulled that out physically from the hermetically sealed glass, what would happen to that? I mean, it's 4 centuries old. It would, of course, dissolve. That's what we call entropy. So entropy, as you know, is the second law of thermodynamics, and it means basically that things increasingly become disorganized over time. Physicists know that in terms of the universe, but we also know that in terms of our office. If we don't pay attention to it, it gets messier and messier, or our bedroom, our house does. If there's a dead animal on the side of the road that a car hit and we drive by that again a week later, you see entropy at work, right? One could argue that life is reverse entropic. There is some process that we don't fully understand actually that creates this reverse entropic process that fights entropy, that is an entropy rebel that allows us to continue living. It's a really interesting, very basic process, but everything from amoeba to human beings have this process. And I would suggest that all of living creatures have, to some degree, a purpose. So we might consider purpose to be an entropy rebel. Now, with human beings, we're probably talking about higher order entropic processes that relate to our social connections and other higher order processing that we engage in. So if we just allow ourselves to kind of sit there and not have any purpose, in a way we lose that direction and then bad things happen, like depression, like dysregulation of our emotions. This is Ethan Cross. Ethan Cross and I do a lot of work together looking at purpose and different strategies for coping with anxiety, coping with stress. He just wrote a wonderful new book called Shift, How to Manage Your Emotions So They Don't Manage You. Both of these books by Emily and Ethan, by the way, are bestsellers, and they're really very readable books. So I'd recommend them to just about anybody. They're also really brilliant researchers, both of them. So when we took a look at, Ethan has a cocktail of, he has 16 different coping strategies. We might call them a potential cocktail of different coping strategies. And I've ordered them here according to, well, I'll talk about how they're ordered in just a second. But if you look at the far left side, drinking alcohol. When you're under a lot of stress, do you drink alcohol? That's one coping strategy, right? Does it work or not? Well, we'll talk about it. Do you eat a lot when you're under stress? Maybe you hide your anxiety. Maybe you vent and get angry to other people. Maybe you distract yourself. Or you could also just simply see a big picture in this whole process. If you're very stressed out, you might go, there's some bigger picture going on. Why am I sweating this small stuff? Or I may even see a silver lining in the stress. Or I may say, this won't last forever. No other stressor has lasted forever in my life, so I know this will go away. In other words, I may take a walk in nature. I may engage in a religious or family ritual. There are a lot of ways we might cope with stress, all the way back down to drinking alcohol. I've ordered these according to sense of purpose. So when we look at the correlations of sense of purpose versus these coping strategies, we see people with stronger purpose in their life, seeing a big picture, knowing there might be a silver lining and trying to work toward that, knowing this won't last, engaging in these family and religious rituals. It's negatively associated with drinking alcohol, and it's very poorly associated with eating or hiding your anxiety. So very importantly, this is also associated with your ability to manage your own emotional weather. Sorry about that. Just raise your hand in the future if you can't hear me. I apologize. Thank you. So we can see that this is, these coping strategies moving to the right, very important over here, are associated with increased purpose, which are also associated with increased ability to manage our emotions. I've written about this. I wrote a book called Life on Purpose. I wrote a graphic novel called On Purpose and published a lot of studies in this area. We also have recently found that people with strong purpose have longer epigenetic clocks, and we looked at a large number of epigenetic clocks, and we could get into detail about that later if you want to ask a question about it. This is a purpose. This is somebody's purpose, and this is a physician who was in our Kellogg, he's one of the senior leaders in our Kellogg Eye Center. And he sent this out of the blue to me, and I asked him whether I could use it in my talks, and he said, yes, of course. So he read my book, Life on Purpose, and then he said, you seem to like to hear other people's purposes, and I do. I'm kind of annoying in that way. So if I'm in a taxi cab and I see that right underneath the mirror there's a picture of somebody's daughter or granddaughter or son or somebody, say, do you have a purpose? And they point to that picture. They go, oh yeah, I have a purpose, that my daughter will be the first one to ever go to college. That's why I work 12-hour days. So people of all walks of life can have purpose. In fact, I think it's an essential human drive of people. But look at his purpose. If you're wondering, do I have a purpose and what does a purpose typically look like? This is a great purpose. To live each day in a state of presence from love rather than fear, so that I can most effectively serve my family unselfishly, treat my patients with care and compassion, serve colleagues and staff with wisdom and humility, teach others with generosity and encouragement, contribute knowledge and perspective to my specialty, and lift the disadvantaged in my community. Notice this purpose that he has different domains. It has a community domain, it has a family domain, it has a work domain, and it has a personal growth domain. We all have those domains, and we might prioritize some over others, of course, but within those domains, he created a very powerful purpose related to his core values. Importantly, being in public health, also note, in order to achieve that and become purposeful, because he might just have a purpose and can send me an email of that purpose, but he needs to be purposeful. In order to do that, he needs to stay healthy. So he's staying healthy, not to live longer necessarily, not to avoid dying or getting sick, but he has this purpose. He's taking care of himself because he has such a strong purpose. That's what we would call intrinsic motivation, and it's a very powerful motivation, and we see less relapse occurring when a person tries to quit smoking or manage other elements of their health, change their diet, workout, when they have intrinsic motivation as opposed to some type of extrinsic motivation. We have an author in the United States, his name was Mark Twain, and he said, and I'm paraphrasing, but he said, I don't care about dying, but I care a lot about not living. And that's what I think we should be doing a little bit more in our fields of public health and medicine, helping people live bigger, more fulfilling lives, and he clearly has. You can see a joy in this purpose that he has. When we look at our college students, and I look at this, in the US, we see that depression levels have been increasing significantly and in a very scary way. I've had a number of students just in the last few years end their own lives, unfortunately. So depression is very, very significant in our country, and it is in this country as well. We also asked this question, and this is a study called the Healthy Mind Survey, and this is done of over 180 colleges and universities throughout the United States. And when this other question about I lead a purposeful and meaningful life, you see that declining at the same time. Now, this is not necessarily causality. I'm simply showing two different statistics, but you see how strongly they are, attached to each other, how connected they seem to be. When we ask people in the Healthy Mind Survey about depression, we use what's called the Patient Health Questionnaire, or the PHQ-9. We look at that by purpose, and we see people with a strong purpose are far less likely to have moderate to severe depression. We also asked this question in the Healthy Mind Survey. In the past year, did you ever seriously think about committing suicide? Very unfortunate question that we have to ask. And many people say yes who are college students, unfortunately now. When we look at that by purpose, we find that people with a high level of purpose have 1/4 the level of suicidal ideation as those who have a low purpose. And all we mean by low purpose is a 1 to 5 on a scale of 1 to 7. That's a low purpose for us. So this is very serious. So we are kind of going all over the place. A lot of people are, especially younger people, unfortunately. We don't know which way to go. We have found, along my colleague Una Kang, who's at the University of Pennsylvania, and I, along with a number of others, including Emily, found that people with stronger purpose have less activation in a part of the brain related to conflict called the dorsal anterior cingulate cortex. This is associated with conflict. It's also associated with pain, by the way. So I find this really interesting. When we literally, while in MRI, we try to conflict a person, giving them alternatives that would cause conflict, people with a strong purpose have less conflict. In other words, they know where they are going. That's an important aspect of having a purpose. Now, when we look around the world, and this is slightly dated, this is 2012 data from what's called the World Values Survey, and this, that's the most recent time they asked whether people think about meaning and purpose in their lives. And you notice that this area of the world has the highest level of thinking about meaning and purpose. Now, if we go to China, that's actually the lowest level, so that's not far away. But when we go to Southeast Asia, we see 91% saying that they often or sometimes think about meaning and purpose in their lives. So this is relevant. It's salient to people here. And thanks to Coursera, and thank you, Coursera, for sponsoring my trip here. Truly appreciate that. They have helped, along with the University of Michigan, create a course that I generated called Finding Purpose and Meaning in Life. So far, this is moving toward 300,000 enrollees, which is very satisfying to me as a teacher, being able to reach so many people. I also recently put out a Purpose at Work. Now, both of these use AI. Both of them use a lot of artificial intelligence, and in fact, Coursera really led the way in online learning programming in developing an AI coach that let authors like me go ahead and introduce deeper AI into the courseware, which allows us to really create a third dimension to our teaching. It's not just, a digital video on a screen that people watch. It's something that, we're able to interact with the person on a one-to-one level. So it's very special. In addition to that, I've created an app called Purposeful. And I've spent 10 years working on this application. And in this Purposeful application, we start out in the morning just asking, how are you feeling? And I might go, oh, I'm feeling great. Oh, good, that's good to hear. So on the basis of that, we'll ask, a little more specificity, and I might say, oh, I'm really excited, which I literally was 2 days ago. Is there a reason? Yes, because I'm going to Asia to give presentations about purpose in an AI-driven economy. It uses AI then to give me some feedback. That's great, Vic, excited, your excitement shines through, etc. That's important to me. I can go back and I can use an AI coach to help me find a purpose in my life. We literally have people develop a purpose statement using an AI coach. And suddenly, the number of people who have actually created purpose statements has just shot up as a result of that coach. So AI can really help people in finding greater purpose. This is my purpose, to be a family man, visionary leader, and friend, to teach my students as if each one was my own child, to be a seeker and supporter of truth and beauty, to help the world become more purposeful, and to get people out onto the dance floor of life. I want people not to necessarily be wallflowers. I'm hoping to support people going out, no matter how goofy their dance is. I think it's important that they get out and they dance. And when you're dancing, if you're a good dancer, you actually don't care what other people think. So it turns out to be pretty important. This, by the way, is my daughter, Rachel, who now is the youngest vice president at the National Geographic, and then her daughter, Madeline, and they were at a wedding in India. So these pictures come up in Purposeful regularly. Just like you probably have a picture on your smartphone, or maybe more than one picture on your smartphone. So every time you open your smartphone, and in the United States, that's an average of 67 times. On average, in one day, we open our smartphone 67 times. So we're opening something that matters to us. We see an image that matters. So, you can ask yourself, what's on my smartphone? Is it a spouse? Is it a child? Is it a grandchild? Is it your dog? Is it a cat? Any of those things might be relevant to you. It could be a saying or quote, it could be a work of nature, but just think about that. Why did you put that on there? Why did you put the number of photographs on there? And hopefully you don't just have the factory settings. So we also take a look at a lot of elements of you. What are your strengths? What are your best self characteristics? What are your core values? What are your roles in your life? And on the basis of that, we generate an overall representation of your core values. We call it a values identity chart. So it's really nice to be able to do this in different parts of the world. But also now we're seeing AI creep in and start saying, well, I can help you find purpose too. In fact, in this Harvard Business Review study that was done in April, what they found is in 2025, the third most likely thing people are asking generative AI about is finding their purpose in life. That's the third most common query of generative AI. That's amazing. Number one is therapy. Number two is organizing my life. In other words, these are all relevant to what we're trying to do and what people need, importantly. But the question is that the right way to do it? So we ask these questions of people, and we assemble them into a framework that simplifies, that distills all of those different core values into these 6 dynamics, these 6 domains. Am I a giver? Or am I an achiever? Am I an adventurer? Am I a guardian? Am I a traditionalist? Am I a self-actualizer? And on the basis of that, we can start looking at all the data that we've collected. We can start identifying patterns in people. We can take a look at those patterns that are most prevalent, and we can create what we've called archetypes around that. So we can create archetypes such as a humanitarian archetype, or a guide or leader archetype, a power player archetype, a nurturer archetype. And so these are kind of basic, but it helps us frame how we are going to help the person, understanding who they are. So just for example, this is a humanitarian, and this would be a purpose of a humanitarian. My purpose is to protect and uplift those who cannot protect themselves. This would be a classic public health worker, actually. Or this person who's an innovator, a maverick entrepreneur. My purpose is to push boundaries, create breakthrough solutions. That would have a very different pattern than the humanitarian pattern. Or we see this leader. My purpose is to use my personal growth and wisdom to guide others toward their highest potential while serving causes greater than myself. Maybe, many leaders have that, including your president here may well have this type of archetypal identity. Once we know that, it's helpful for us to understand how we can help them. And we use AI to develop those patterns, to put all of this together. When we think about AI, I like to think about other technologies as well. So if we think about the time it takes to reach 100 million global users of different technologies, it turns out that it took 90 years for the telephone to reach 100 million global users. 90 years. It took 70 years, and this is just US data, the rest is all global data, but it took 70 years for the US to reach 100 million users of electricity. It took 60 years globally for 100 million users to start driving cars. It took only 16 years for 100 million users to start using mobile technology. It took just 7 years for people to start using the World Wide Web. And it took 2 months to get 100 million users using ChatGPT. That's scary. That's crazy. That's happening too fast for a lot of us, isn't it? Certainly for me. I mean, how do you keep up with that? How do you understand where it's going? How do you capitalize on it and use it in a way that can really help people? Well, we need to try because we didn't ask for AI. It is here, though, and we can stick our heads in the sand and say it doesn't exist or we don't want it to, but it does. So when we look at opinions about AI, This is a wonderful survey produced by Stanford University. We can look at people who are excited about AI and people who are nervous about AI. And by the way, you can say you're both. But when we look at China, we see the overwhelming majority of people are more excited than they are nervous about AI. When we look at India, 63% versus 51%. So more people are excited than nervous. More people in Indonesia are excited than nervous about AI. In Singapore, more people are excited than nervous. In Thailand, what do you think? More excited than nervous by a lot. How about the US? Laggards. Yes, we've got our head in the sand. We're hoping it goes away somehow, right? That's what my colleagues say. We just hope it goes away. We tell our students not to use it. Really? You tell your students not to use AI? Because when you get out and you don't know AI, you're not going to be that marketable. You know, you better learn AI. I think it's really important. But how do we use AI? How do we work with AI in the right way? So there are three just general theories about what will happen to the future of AI. And this is experts, AI experts talking about it. One group thinks, wow, it may just go away. Like a lot of my academic colleagues hope it'll just go away. I don't think it will. I mean, it could possibly, especially generative AI, as it continues to spew out stuff that the AI itself had created, and gradually it creates this giant flushing sound. I doubt it, and most people doubt it. We think that's less than 10%. Another option, another potential future, is that it will destroy us. And this is a real possible future. Ray Kurzweil now has a brand new book out talking about the singularity. The singularity is now, he's saying, and we need to be concerned about that. We need to be concerned about AI's consciousness, certainly. There is potential for that. Certainly AI will take many jobs. I think there's no doubt about that. But could it also enhance jobs? So I guess I'm somewhat of a techno-optimist in this, and I think that AI could become a force multiplier, especially for many jobs, especially if we understand the type of AI that's most relevant. So for example, for the humanitarian we were talking about, it would be good to understand resource optimization. That's AI. There are AI tools for that. Predictive modeling is AI. It's early AI, but it's getting better and better with AI. Language translation, there is AI for that. Purpose alignment, we just talked about our purposeful application, and there are other things similar to that. Online learning, Coursera is certainly a predominant, the world's predominant online course platform. All of those things may be relevant AI for a humanitarian. Now, what if I have a different identity, different needs, different values, different purpose? If I'm this maverick entrepreneur and innovator, I might need transdisciplinary synthesis, not interdisciplinary or multidisciplinary, but transdisciplinary, where you're literally creating your own new discipline in a way from these other disciplines, building something very unique. That's where real innovation comes from, and AI is really good at doing that. Market trend prediction if she's building a new company, creative prototyping if she's doing that, but also making sure she's aligned with her purpose, and she has an online learning platform so she can continue to pick up on all the latest information that she's curious about. This leader might need AI-based leadership coaching, sentiment analysis. AI is wonderful at doing that. Global trend analysis, AI. Online learning platform, of course. Purpose alignment, of course. You could say that for any of these archetypes that we're talking about, or for any identity, you might identify specific AI programming, but we don't know which one until we first understand who you are. So we talk about AI as if it's one entity, and it's not. It's many, many different AIs, and if I have one recommendation to organizations, whether it's corporations or academic organizations, it's that they would create some type of AI group who spends a lot of time thinking about the different types of AI and assembles those and helps people understand which AI is best for them. so that it does become a force multiplier. I think that will be the future of where we're heading, to actually use AI to help people as opposed to destroying jobs and maybe destroying humanity. When we think about universities, I like to think about the traditional universities. Oxford now is over 1,000 years old, literally. I created it in 1000. And I think about these institutions not having changed all that much in 1,000 years. If you think about what these organizations do and did, it hasn't changed that much. And if you think about this dragon, this thou shalt Nietzschean dragon that on every scale says thou shalt, you start looking at what these organizations propose, it's 4 years. You spend 4 years as an undergrad in college. You do it all in your late adolescence, maybe even before your prefrontal cortex is fully connected. It's expensive typically. It's residential typically. It's in semesters or terms. There are midterms. There are finals. There are grades. There are specific degrees that you get. Why? Do we need all of that necessarily? Why not destroy that thou shalt dragon and start thinking about new ways of educating? For example, we could why do we have to stop educating ourselves once we are 22 years old or 25 years old or 30 years old? Why do we have to just stop, interacting with people? Well, this is where Coursera and other online learning platforms really have changed the game. They've said, you don't have to do this in 4 years. It doesn't have to be expensive. You can do it autonomously. You can pick up the skills you need. And, with the best online learning platforms, they're very effective at that. And we're seeing more and more of these emerge and even integrating with universities in very effective ways. That's why I'm here. That's why I'm such a supporter of what Coursera and other online learning platforms do. We're able to reach far more people, and especially people who can't afford it. I think it's really important. So when I think about it, I think about putting people into this 2x2 cell. When we teach people, we often start with people who are hopeless. They have no skills, and they have no purpose or direction or vision. They don't know where they're going, and they wouldn't know how to get there in the first place if they did. Most programs that I know, including Coursera and many academic centers, teach skills. And they pride themselves on giving skills to people. But if you just teach skills, but don't help a person find a direction and purpose in their lives, we might call them aimless. And I talk with and speak with and work with many people who are incredibly skilled people who also do not have a purpose or who have lost their purpose and direction. And those people get very depressed, they become disengaged in their work, and they often drop out or they burn out. And that's a big problem. So we could have people who have a strong sense of purpose, but don't have the skills. I know a lot of those people. So people have to be patient as well. Once you have developed an identity, a sense of core values, a sense of purpose, you need to give people skills. And once you have that, you've created hope in people. And that's what I think universities should be doing. They should be creating hope. And I think we can be very effective at that. And I think in that case, we can all be like public health workers, and we can prevent, just as we're preventing polio, we can also prevent depression. We can prevent suicidal ideation and suicide. We can prevent this ennui that I think our societies and our world is actually increasing in, unfortunately. That we are getting more nihilistic and more narcissistic. And I think we need to fight that, and I think that is a public health endeavor. So that's why I'm very proud to be working with Coursera and building these programs around purpose. Really happy to be disseminating through the courses. At the end of the course, you can get significant discount on this application called Purposeful. And I just want to say, as I close out, if you are at all interested in the Purposeful application, there's a QR code here on the right, and we're providing Purposeful for free for 30 days if anybody is interested. So if you would like a copy of the Purposeful application, you can just use that QR code. Thank you very much for your time.